Jordan Peterson's deleted YouTube videos, October to November 2016. In late September 2016, Jordan Peterson, then a psychology professor at the University of Toronto, uploaded a series of self-made videos to YouTube under the title Professor Against Political Correctness. The videos were a direct response to Bill C-16, proposed Canadian legislation that would add gender identity and gender expression to the list of protected grounds under federal human rights law. In the videos, Peterson warned that the bill would mandate compelled speech. He framed it as a sign of rising PC authoritarianism. He stated publicly that he would refuse to use gender-neutral or preferred pronouns if legally compelled to do so. The reaction was immediate. Students protested, colleagues criticized him, national media amplified the story, supporters rallied behind him as a defender of free expression. Over the next several weeks, Peterson continued posting videos, responding to critics, escalating his warnings, and documenting the unfolding controversy at the University of Toronto. The episode culminated in a widely attended public debate in November 2016. These videos were not minor footnotes. They were foundational. They launched Peterson's public career and shaped the narrative that followed. However, today, many of the videos are gone. 10 of those early videos from October and November 2016, including the University of Toronto debate, have been quietly removed from his YouTube channel. There was no public statement explaining their removal, no archival repost. They simply disappeared from the official record. Yet, they were preserved. Archived captures remain accessible through the Wayback Machine. What follows are those deleted videos, presented in full in their original form. October 4th, 2016. A brief note to tomorrow's student demonstrators.
So here's a brief note to tomorrow's student demonstrators. For those of you who don't know, there's a demonstration planned for tomorrow. They call it a rally and teach-in at Sydney Smith Hall. That's 100 St. George Street, Toronto. 479 people are interested. 232 people are going, and 1,100 people have had this missive shared with them. And so this is the call to action released by people who are planning the rally. And I'm addressing that for a number of reasons, but I'm going to stick to one very briefly. The people who are putting out this call to action have said the following. Jordan Peterson, a University of Toronto professor and practicing psychologist, has released the first of a planned 3-part video series attacking political correctness in academia. In this video, he declares his proud unwillingness to call transgender people by any pronouns he does not believe apply to them, his disbelief in the very existence of non-binary people, and his belief that any attempts to challenge him or anyone else on these points amount to Marxist fascism. Okay, so the first thing I would say is that I do not regard any of those 3 statements about what I said as accurate representations of what I said. But I don't have time at the moment to do a detailed refutation of them point by point, so I'm going to have to make this very straightforward and simple. I don't disbelieve in the existence of non-binary people. Okay, do you want me to say that again? Obviously, people who don't fit into standard binary categories of sexual identity, however you decide to construe that, broadly or narrowly, obviously those people exist. I never said they didn't exist. What I said instead was that biological sex, gender identity, and gender expression do not vary independently. And they don't vary independently. And I'll just leave it at that for now because I don't have enough time to go into the rest of it, although I will in the future. So if you're going out tomorrow to this demonstration because you want to indicate your discomfort with my disbelief in the very existence of non-binary people, you might as well just stay home.
October 12th, 2016. Letter from UT student groups objecting to my videos.
Well, I won't back down. No, I won't back down. You can stand me up at the gates of hell, but I won't back down.
Good morning, boys, girls, and interested others. So the calls for my discipline and silencing have begun in earnest. So I'm going to read you 2 letters that have been produced publicly and within the university community itself. The first one has received some press attention. I don't believe the second one has yet. So October 6, 2016. So this was produced by a variety of student organizations, and I'll discuss who they are at the end of the letter. To the attention of the University of Toronto administration and the U of T community, we, the undersigned community members at the University of Toronto, are appalled, concerned, and saddened by recent transphobic, racist, and anti-black comments made by Professor Jordan Peterson in an online lecture series that he published on YouTube on September 27th, 2016 and October 3rd, 2016. Peterson has abused his position of power as a tenured professor and has tried to use his academic freedom to disguise his bigotry and prejudice as an intellectual disagreement. However, to suggest that these comments add value to classroom discussion is absurd. By the way, that's not a suggestion that I've made. We would like to bring attention to the University of Toronto's Statement of Equity, Diversity, and Excellence. No doubt, they would like to bring attention to that, which states that the University of Toronto will proactively seek to increase diversity among our community members, and it is our aim to have a student body, teaching, and administrative staff that mirror the diversity of the pool of potentially qualified applicants for those positions. And it is our responsibility to help in the creation of an equitable community, one that is diverse as well as inclusive and that is respectful and protects the human rights of its members, something that requires the work of every member of the community across all our sites and campuses, including students, teaching staff, administrative staff, visitors, alumni, and guests. The university is committed to internal policies on issues related to equity and also operates in compliance with all legislation that bears on equity and human rights. In a recent 2-part lecture given by Jordan Peterson, which was published on YouTube, see the relevant URLs, Peterson goes on a 57-minute rant regarding his disapproval of Bill C-16, which proposes to include gender identity and gender expression as prohibited grounds for harassment and discrimination under the Canadian Human Rights Act and the Criminal Code. This same bill is considered by many political scholars and members of trans communities as an advancement of human rights and equal protection under the law. Peterson is also a man who has complained that the Ontario Human Rights Commission's terms and definitions are over-inclusive and all-encompassing. Surely, inclusivity is an important factor when discussing human rights protections. In one of his lectures, Peterson includes various disparaging comments about members of the trans community. He argues that there is no evidence to support the existence of non-binary identities. That is not something I argued, by the way, a statement that is inaccurate. Furthermore, when discussing the use of his students' preferred pronouns, Peterson stated, "I won't recognize another person's right to determine what pronouns I use to address them. I won't do it." Yes, that is true. Purposefully misgendering a trans person is an act of violence. Well, you better pay attention to that, because what that essentially means is that speech is now an act of violence. And then, more importantly, refusal to use the words that someone else demands that you use is an act of violence. That's what I'm being accused of. Okay, in my second 57-minute rant, titled Part 2, Compulsory Education, Political Education, a Real-World Case Study at the U of Toronto, Peterson states his disapproval of the mandatory anti-discrimination and anti-bias training that the U of T has mandated for its HR professionals. An opinion that he was not asked for by anyone. The Black Liberation Collective was successful in advocating for this equity training to be done, not for the comfort of those who have always been accommodated and welcome within the institution, but for those who are made voiceless. It was crafted from a place of wanting better in the environments that we as students daily partake in, keeping in mind the ways in which people in powerful positions of this university are allowed to dehumanize students through microaggressions, gaslighting, and blatant disrespect without any accountability or repercussions. According to the U of T's statements of institutional purpose, the university affirms its dedication to fostering an academic community in which the learning and scholarship of every member may flourish with vigilant protection for individual human rights and a resolute commitment to the principle of equal opportunity, equity, and justice. The fact that a tenured professor employed with the U of T refuses to acknowledge the use of personal pronouns, they mean preferred pronouns, by the way. I do actually use personal pronouns, and has the audacity to try and rationalize and quantify racism as something subjective, I have no idea where that comes from, not only discredits the lived experiences of students who have dealt with this reality, but also silences them. More violence occurs as someone in a position of power who not only has the nerve to say such statements publicly, can still be a respected member of the university community and not face any formal university backlash and continue to enjoy tenure. We are sick of discriminatory faculty members denying our expertise and our experiences and not respecting who we are, especially when we merely ask for our lived realities to be respected and not disregarded. Well, you'll see how much asking is being done later in this letter. We are deeply concerned about the university's lack of action on this situation, especially as Peterson continues to spread his transphobic and racist ideologies through various media outlets. I really have no idea where the racism thing is going, and I'm not transphobic, so whatever. The university has failed to act on this situation, and this ultimately showcases that, quote, diversity, inclusion, and equal respect are simply legalities and are not principles that the U of T intends on upholding. The U of T has failed at maintaining a positive space and campuses free of hate. As a result, we, the undersigned, are demanding accountability from the university administration and governing council with the following 5 demands. Now, one thing you'll note about the people who do this sort of thing is that they're always demanding, and that's for sure. And a demand means or else. And that's also what legislation means. A public apology from Professor Jordan Peterson and a full retraction of his comments. Yeah, well, hell will freeze over before that happens. Removal of his transphobic and racist lectures from YouTube, thus affirming their commitment to free speech. A town hall with President Merrick Gertler, Provost Cheryl Regier, Vice President Angela Hildyard, and Professor Jordan Peterson, where community members can explain the issues that he clearly does not comprehend. And here's a good one. Mandated anti-oppression training at all levels of the University of Toronto, including faculty and administration, to happen every academic semester. A commitment that the University of Toronto will take action to defend students and university community members in future instances where tenured professors have made prejudiced comments against an individual or group on the basis of race, sexual orientation, ability, sex, religion, gender expression, or gender identity. We would also like to remind the administration that the University of Toronto statements on equity, diversity, and excellence states, our support for equity is grounded in an institution-wide commitment to achieving a working, teaching and learning environment that is free of discrimination and harassment as defined in the Ontario Human Rights Code. In striving to become an equitable community, we will also work to eliminate, reduce, or mitigate the adverse effects of any barriers to full participation in university life that we find, including in physical, environmental, attitudinal, communication, or technological. Hateful comments should never be tolerated, especially not from someone who is considered to be an educator. No student should have to endure a 2-hour lecture where their gender identity, existence, and realities are being debated and refused. Ultimately, Peterson's comments erode the safe campus learning environment to which the university states a commitment. We hope that the university will respond to this situation within a reasonable time frame and in accordance with the policies established by the Governing Council. We also hope that these demands are approved when the Governing Council meets on October 27, 2016. And so here's the people that are doing this. Denio Lorenko, UTM SU LGBTQ coordinator. I'll make their email addresses available at the end of this video. Maurice Hopkins, UTMSU and Black Liberation Collective organizer. Mala Kashyap, President, Association of Part-Time Undergraduate Students. Roya Garamani, Executive Director, out at UTM. Julian Oliveira, LGBT out, University of Toronto. Noor Ali Deeb, UTMSU President. And so, okay, students, so these are your elected officials, so you can decide if they're actually speaking for you. And then it's copied to all these university administrators. So that's the first letter. So if you're looking for something to do to help, you could write a letter to the individuals whose emails I have posted in the information box and the description box that is associated with this video. So email them and email all of them and send me a copy if you want. That would be helpful. Be particularly useful if it came from students. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
October 12th, 2016. Letter from Queer Caucus Canadian Union of Public Employees objecting to my videos.
Well, I won't back down. No, No, I won't back down. You can stand me up at the gates of hell, but I won't back down.
In the first video I posted this morning, I read a letter from a variety of student activist groups calling for my silencing, apology, and discipline. In this video, I'm going to read a similar letter from a branch of the Canadian Union of Public Employees asking for similar measures. And so this is the second letter. This is from the Canadian Union of Public Employees. Actually, it's from one branch of the Canadian Union of Public Employees. I should also note that another president of the Canadian Union of Public Employees actually came and talked to me yesterday on something unrelated to this, about his fear that the new university sexual harassment policy is so broad and so wide that it risks turning normal misunderstandings into career-destroying debacles. And so I'm just telling you that so that you know that, there's not homogeneity on the left, and there's not homogeneity within the Canadian Union of Public Employees either. But anyways, here's what they want. Jordan Peterson's comments make the U of T a hostile place to work and study. As queer people who study and work at the University of Toronto, we have the right to fully access all the resources of the university without fear. We have the right to enter and participate in every classroom, every lab, library, athletic facility, and event space, and we have the right to participate as ourselves. We have the right to go to work and be treated with dignity and respect. We owe no one an explanation of, much less a defense of, our gender or our sexuality. We insist on a truth so simple that it shouldn't need to be stated, that we, and not a psychology professor who has never met us, are the authorities on our own identities. And yes, we have the right to be recognized and referred to as we are in the ways we choose. We refuse to allow anyone, least of all someone who could be our professor or our work supervisor, to decide that he knows better who we are and what is the right way to refer to us. If insisting on this kind of recognition seems petty or unimportant to some, we remind them of our long and continuing struggle as queer people to gain the same rights, freedoms, and recognitions enjoyed by cis, straight people. Cis, that's a word I really don't like, by the way. That's a manufactured word, and that's exactly the kind of word that I'm not ever going to be compelled to say. We remind them that for us, going to work already involves a daily calculus, situation by situation, colleague by colleague, of what and how much of ourselves to reveal. We have to remain conscious at all times of the details of our lives that may make us physically unsafe, prompt humiliating questions, lead to social alienation, or take away our chance at the next employment contract we desperately need. In this city in 2016, it is not safe to be a queer person. That's why we had a month-long Pride Festival last year. And it is especially not safe to be a trans or gender non-conforming person. At the University of Toronto, our commitment must not only be to protect, but to affirm and elevate our colleagues who face discrimination and danger in their daily lives. We should be proactive in inviting, recognizing that the default expectation for queer people is that we will not be welcomed in new environments we enter. Instead, recent comments by Professor Jordan Peterson have communicated that in some parts of our working lives, trans and gender non-conforming people are not welcome, that we will be denied basic recognition of our humanity, that we will be called delusional and lectured to, and that a potential supervisor will be given authority to decide who we really are and how we should be referred to at work. In our union's view, this situation constitutes a clear and unacceptable violation of our human rights and our workplace rights. It is also a violation of the collective agreements we negotiate with the university to set the terms and expectations of our working lives. These collective agreements guarantee us protection from, quote, verbal conduct or other forms of communication that emphasize the sex, sexuality, or gender identity or expression of an employee in a manner that the actor, i.e. Jordan Peterson, knows or ought reasonably to know is unwelcome or creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive working or learning environment. Professor Peterson ought reasonably to know that refusing to address his students and his TAs as they request to be addressed and deriding their identities in public, I have no idea what that means, is unwelcome behavior that makes his classroom, his department, and his university intimidating, hostile, and offensive for us. The U of T administration ought reasonably to know that when comments like this are made in public, they need to be swiftly and categorically condemned, and appropriate actions need to be taken to restore a workplace free of intimidation and hostility. But in case any of our managers and supervisors didn't understand that actions like Professor Peterson's and the silence of the university administration in response are unwelcome, hostile, and offensive, let us be the ones to tell you. They are, and now you know. We expect and demand better, and our union will be organizing and acting accordingly. Sincerely, QP 3902 Queer Caucus, Canadian Union of Public Employees, Local 3902. So if you're looking for something to do to help, you could write a letter to the individuals whose emails I have posted in the information box and the description box that is associated with this video. So email them and email all of them and send me a copy if you want. That would be helpful. Be particularly useful if it came from students. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
October 18th, 2016. U Toronto requests my silence.
Hi there. So I thought I'd update you with regards to what has been going on at the University of Toronto in the last week. Since I released my 3 videos starting on September 27th dealing with political correctness at the legislative level and in terms of certain policy decisions at the University of Toronto, most particularly the mandatory requirement that the human resources staff take anti-racism and anti-bias training. So on October 3rd, I received the first of 2 warning letters telling me that I was required to act in accordance with university policies and with the relevant law. I'm not going to read you the first letter, but I'll read you the second one, which I got on October 18th. So, Dear Professor Peterson, we are writing in follow-up to Professor Ferber's letter to you of October 3rd, 2016. Professor Ferber is the chair of the psychology department, and she gave me the first letter as a consequence of her interactions with a variety of administrators at the university. Regarding the ongoing concerns related to your videos and complaints that have been made to the university by members of the university community, including transgendered persons and the organizations that represent and support them on campus, about some of the content of those videos. First, let us be clear that the university is committed to the protection of freedom of speech as a core value for our community and for any university in a democratic society. The university is likewise committed to protecting the academic freedom of our faculty members, including their right to criticize the university and society at large, with freedom from institutional censorship, as articulated in Article 5 of the Memorandum of Agreement between the University of Toronto and the University of Toronto Faculty Association. The university's commitment to protecting these core values includes your right to express and debate views that may be discomforting or even offensive to others. However, as Professor Ferber has already pointed out to you, these rights are not without limitation and must be exercised in accordance with your responsibilities as a faculty member, including upholding applicable laws. You have continued to state publicly that if a student or colleague or staff member requests that you refer to them using gender-neutral pronouns, you will refuse to do so, and that you do not recognize the rights of others to tell you which personal pronoun to use when addressing them. The law of Ontario, specifically the Ontario Human Rights Code, protects against discrimination based on gender expression and gender identity. Depending on the context, if personal pronouns are being used, the refusal by a teacher or colleague to use the personal pronoun that is an expression of the person's gender identity can constitute discrimination. In many situations, it is not necessary to use personal pronouns at all. But where it is, the personal pronoun that is chosen as the person's gender identity related and gender expression related identifier should be used. Your statements that you will refuse to use Your statements that you will refuse to refer to transgendered persons using gender-neutral pronouns if they ask you to do so are contrary to the rights of those persons to equal treatment without discrimination, based on their gender identity and gender expression. You should also be aware that many members of the university community are concerned and distressed about the declarations of your discriminatory intentions. The university has received communications from individual student groups and employee groups that find my comments to be unacceptable, emotionally disturbing, and painful. Some members of the university community report that the statements and the invective that has followed in the ensuing commentary and debates on social media have caused them to fear for their safety on the university campus. Some students have reported being the target of specific and violent threats, including threats of assault, injury, and death against them individually and as members of the trans community. We trust that these impacts on students and others were not your intention in making these remarks. However, in view of these impacts, as well as the requirements of the Ontario Human Rights Code, we urge you to stop repeating these statements. As Professor Ferber informed you, your responsibilities as a faculty member at the University of Toronto include an obligation to uphold the law, including the Ontario Human Rights Code, and to do so as you exercise your academic freedom or freedom of expression. Your responsibilities as a faculty member also include dealing with other members of the university community in ways that provide equal treatment without discrimination. Article 5 of the Memo of Agreement between U-Toronto and the U-Toronto Faculty Association not only recognizes that faculty members have the right to academic freedom, but also notes the responsibility of faculty members to establish fair and ethical dealings with students, as well as with colleagues. The impact of your behavior runs the risk of undermining your ability to conduct essential components of your job as a faculty member. And we urge you to consider your obligations as a faculty member, to act in a manner that is consistent with the law and with university policy. You have referred to allegations of criminal behavior by some in attendance at the rally of October 11th, 2016. The university deplores acts of violence and its disruption of civil debate. The allegations of criminal behavior are being investigated by the Toronto Police Service. The university continues to emphasize to its community members the obligation to engage in civil, non-violent interactions at all times, including when difficult topics are discussed on campus. Yours sincerely, David Cameron, Dean, Faculty of Arts and Science, Siobhan Nelson, Vice Provost, Faculty and Academic Life. Copied to Professor Suzanne Ferber, Chair of the Department of Psychology. So, I'm being urged to stop saying what I'm saying. Well, the next video I'll post, and hopefully today, will be my response to that.
October 24th, 2016. My response.
So hi, guys and girls and interested others. So, on October 18th, I received a letter from the University of Toronto asking for my silence with regards to what I've been discussing. On September 27th, I made a video I called Fear in the Law, which was a discussion of what I believe to be a set of particularly insidious legislative moves on the part of the provincial and federal governments in Canada, laying the groundwork for requiring a certain kind of compulsory speech from the citizens of Canada. And I commented in that video that I believed that the act of making the video itself and discussing the issues that are relevant to that legislation was probably illegal. On October 3rd, I made another video decrying the University of Toronto Human Resources Department's recent decision to make anti-racism and anti-bias training mandatory, partly as a consequence of their interactions with a group called the Black Liberation Collective, which is not a particularly savory group, to say the least. And then on October 5th, I recorded another video laying out what I described the PC game, which is an ideologically motivated victimization / perpetrator game, and I outlined some counter tactics. In those videos, I said that discussion of gender issues has probably become illegal now in Canada, maybe even a hate crime. One of the consequences of that was a number of lawyers wrote articles saying that I was just scaremongering and that Bill C-16, for example, doesn't have that intent. I didn't say precisely that Bill C-16 had that intent, although I believe it opens the door to such things, but I did say that the surrounding policy discussions on the Ontario Human Rights Commission, which is not a good place, indicated that it probably had become illegal. And I would say the fact that the university has now written me 2 letters suggesting that in fact what I was doing was illegal makes my argument better than anything I could do. I also said that biological sex, gender identity, and gender expression do not vary independently, and they don't vary independently, by the way, even though that's become axiomatic in the underlying legislation. And they don't vary independently because the overwhelming majority of people have a gender expression, gender identity, and biological sex that are the same, in that 98% of biological males identify as male and dress as males, and the same is true of females. So they don't vary independently. People confused that with me saying that there were no such thing as, say, non-binary people or transgender people, and I never said that, but that doesn't really matter, apparently. My fundamental concern was that we are now legally required to use an approved language when speaking, and when speaking about fundamental issues like gender, and there's very few issues more fundamental than gender. And I said that I wouldn't do it because it is a very dangerous requirement. It's the first time that I can tell where, instead of restrictions on free speech being of the sort that there are things you can't say hate crime things, and I'm not an advocate of hate crime laws, by the way, hate crime speech laws. I think they're dangerous, but in any case, I can understand why people think they're necessary. But this law requires us to use a certain kind of approved language, and I thought that that was a line we shouldn't cross. I also said I wouldn't mouth the words of the ideologically possessed, and that was with regards to gender-neutral pronouns, because those pronouns, which haven't passed into common usage, by the way, because they're very awkward and not well crafted, to me they're words that have been produced by a certain kind of radical left-wing activist, egalitarian, whose ideology I regard as perhaps posing the most serious threat to the freedom of the West that currently exists, and so I'm not going to use their words. And I said that free speech is in serious danger in Canada because of an onslaught of radical leftist ideology. So that was basically my claims. I got a warning letter from Suzanne Ferber, chair of the psychology department, and in the background, David Cameron, Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Science, Cheryl Regier, Vice President and Provost, and Kelly Hannah Moffat, VP HR and Equity, the person, by the way, who's now responsible for the mandatory anti-racism and anti-bias training initiatives at the University of Toronto, and who has refused to disavow her department's association with the Black Liberation Collective, despite the fact that they will not disavow violence in the pursuit of their aims, and in spite of the fact that 2 of the people who organized that particular organization have a history of misbehavior, to put it mildly. The letter said, the initial letter said that I, meaning me, did not recognize the rights of others to tell me which personal pronoun to use when addressing them, and yes, that is something I do not recognize. I do not recognize the rights of others to tell anyone which personal pronoun to use when addressing them. I'm standing by that. The U of T said that was required to acceptance of their statutorily protected right to equality and equal treatment. So now my failure to use preferred pronouns like Z and Zer, or whatever pronouns people want for that matter, is transgressing against their rights in a manner that appears to contravene the legislation. That it's interesting that the university warned me of that, because of course that's exactly why I made the video to begin with. The letter also said, I do not accept that gender identification can be independent of biological sex. The U of T said that was discriminatory as well. I did not say that, and I informed the U of T that their letter did not do a good job of actually accusing me. They didn't accuse me properly of what I said, and I offered to give them the letter back so that they could write it properly, but they refused. So then it stands the way it stands. So, but we won't talk about that letter too much, because we might as well talk about the newer one. So the consequences of what I did were crazy, really. There were 2 demonstrations at the University of Toronto. The second one, which was the free speech, the first one was a demonstration against me, personally, I would say. because of what I had dared to say. And the second one was a free speech rally that was organized by students. I had nothing to do with it except that I came to speak at it, as did Lauren Southern, who's a journalist for Rebel Media. That has obtained massive online and YouTube coverage, partly because Lauren Southern was the victim of what appears to be an assault at the free speech rally, and that has now been viewed by, I would think, several million people. What I did got and the demonstrations and all of that, got massive traditional media coverage. The national radio in Canada, the national TV, all our major stations, a huge number of newspapers, columns, op-eds, all sorts of things. It's been one of the biggest stories in Canada for the last 10 days, I would say, and massive online coverage as well. And so I think the reason for that, because, I just sat in my office and made a video about Bill C-16 and complained about political correctness, but I did something different, you see, and this is what I think the difference is that people complain a lot about political correctness, but they never get the tire to hit the road, or they never hit the nail on the head with the hammer. See, what I did was I said, I don't like political correctness, and here's something that I'm being required to do by politically correct people, and I will not do it. I won't do it, period. And I stand by that. I am not going to use made-up pronouns to refer to people. If we sort this out linguistically in the next 20 years and we spontaneously come up with a term that solves some of the problems with gendered pronouns that perhaps we have, although I'm not convinced that we have, but if a spontaneous and consensus-oriented decision is made around the use of a new term, then I'm willing to adopt it as well as much as the next person, but I'm not having it forced on me, and I don't think anyone else should, and I'm not using the damn made-up words by radical left-wing activists, and that's that. So anyways, I also got two letters from the university. The first letter said, you believe that some of your commentary may be illegal. Yes, I believe that. That's why I made the video, because I don't think that the sorts of things that I was saying should be illegal in a free society. I think it's unbelievably dangerous and short-sighted. The letter said, I must comply with the law, including the Ontario Human Rights Code, and I must consider the impact of my words and actions on my students and colleagues. Well, let me tell you this. I consider the impact of my words and actions on my students and colleagues extraordinarily carefully. I might say, in fact, that I consider the impact of my words and actions far more carefully than did the people who wrote these letters, and I'm going to explain why I believe that. So the second letter, which actually requested my silence, the first one was more of a warning, was signed by David Cameron, Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Science, and Sia Ben Nelson, Vice President, Faculty and Academic Life. And I read it in the previous video, so you can now post it as well, so you can look at the details, but I'm going to go over it more or less topic by topic now. I'm going to analyze it. I'm going to deconstruct it. That's what you might think. For all you postmodernists out there, here's an example of deconstruction in action. Okay, so the first part of the letter detailed out essentially what the University of Toronto understands to be my comments and the complaints the U of T has received. Then the UT outlined their hypothetical commitment to free speech, talked about my refusal to use gender-neutral pronouns, described that refusal as illegal. So the letter first details out my comments, discusses the fact that I made these videos, and then states that there are ongoing concerns about those videos that have been expressed by a variety of groups and individuals at the university. The next part of the letter, at least in principle, details the University of Toronto's commitment to free speech. Now, I found this interesting in a rather Orwellian way. George Orwell, of course, discussed the use of something he called doublespeak, which is to say one thing and mean another, or maybe mean precise other. So in the letter, the second thing the University of Toronto does is stress that it has a commitment to free speech. But then, of course, later in the letter, it decides that that does not extend to its professors choosing their own pronouns. So you can decide for yourself how deep that commitment goes. Then they discuss that my refusal to use gender-neutral pronouns is probably illegal. Now, there's a variety of ways of looking at this. One way of looking at it is that there is a provision in the Ontario Human Rights Code. Yeah, this is it. That any act or thing done or omitted to be done in the course of his or her employment by an officer, official, employee, or agent of a corporation, etc., shall be deemed to be an act or thing done or omitted to be done by the corporation, trade union, trade or occupational association, unincorporated association, or employers organization. So basically what that says, that section 46.31 of the Human Rights Code, is that if you have an employee who says something and it's not a good thing, then you are responsible for it as if you said it, which is another part of the legislation that I was actually complaining about in the initial videos. And so the U of T, I think partly they wrote me this letter maybe because they had a conversation with their legal department and they said, well, this professor might be right, this could all be illegal, maybe it's even hate speech, and if he's doing it, then because you're his employer, you're also responsible for it. So maybe that's part of the reason for the warning letter. But anyways, they've decided that my refusal to use gender-neutral pronouns is it's certainly discriminatory as far as they're concerned, and it may also be illegal, which I would like to stress again was exactly why I made the videos to begin with. So it's not like they're reminding me of something that I don't know. So the next part of it was a discussion of distress in the University of Toronto community. They have received communications from individual students and employee groups finding my comments unacceptable, emotionally disturbing, and painful. You can watch the videos yourself and see if they're emotionally disturbing and painful. I might point out that if listening to my comments is painful, then if you think that's painful, then it's possible that nothing actually painful has ever happened to you in your life. Like I was thinking over the last couple of weeks, people have been asking me about how stressful this is. It's like, well, it's no walk in the park, I can tell you that. But compared to something that's really stressful, like maybe a family member has cancer, or that's a good one. Or you've actually been thrown in jail by an authoritarian society or being tortured. I mean, this is not very stressful. This is political dialogue. And, I would say that there was a week or two there where I thought my job was probably in danger, and maybe it still is. But compared to a real pain, like real suffering, even that is, I wouldn't call it trivial, but it's not traumatic, that's for sure. Anyways, my statements, and the invective that has followed caused them to fear for their safety, and they've become the target of specific and violent threats. Well, I certainly think that threats directed to people are reprehensible, and I'm not calling for that. I'm calling for reasoned and articulate debate. But I would also like to point out, and this is another part of the letter that I seriously object to, is that it would have been much better had the University of Toronto written me and said, look, we've received a whole variety of communications regarding your videos, some positive and supportive and some critical and negative, and having carefully reviewed all of these, we've decided that it would be in the best interest of the university and maybe in keeping with our policies and the relevant laws if you stopped saying the sorts of things that you're saying. But that isn't what happened. The letter selectively omitted to mention the fact that the University of Toronto has received a petition that has at least 5,000 signatures in support of me, and also several hundred letters, which I know because I've been CC'd on them, and that it appears that the bulk of public opinion is also on my side. None of that was mentioned in the letter, and that also taught me how institutions become corrupted when free speech is in danger, because, and I've often wondered this because I know that such things happened in the Soviet Union where people over decades swallowed very large lies, and it seems to me that this is the way it happens. Institutions start writing letters that are that contain sins of omission, right? They omit relevant information, and present a very biased and one-sided view of an issue. And then once that's written down, it becomes the reality, because one of the things that psychologists do know is that if you write down a set of opinions, those rapidly become your core beliefs, even if you don't think that you had those beliefs before you wrote the letter. So, and then of course the issue with the threats, that's a real interesting one, because when Lauren Southern was assaulted at the U of T free speech rally, and that was captured on video, and more than, I would say, maybe 2 million people have watched that now. The university didn't say a thing about it in their public communications, but when there were threats made by some boneheaded morons online. And we don't know who these people were, by the way. We don't know if they were trolls. We don't know if they were provocateurs. We don't even know if they were the social justice warriors themselves. And I wouldn't put it past them because they've done that sort of thing in the past. So these were threats from unverified sources that were posted online. The university immediately set out a memo stating that, an unsafe, potentially unsafe atmosphere had been produced on campus, and that, the university decries or is opposed to all sorts of violent and aggressive acts and expressions thereof. But they didn't send out the same memo when Lauren Southern was assaulted at the free speech rally. And they also, and this is particularly the case with Kelly Hannah Moffat, who's the Human Resources Vice President. I informed her, and many other people have, that the Black Liberation Collective, from whom she's taking advice with regards to anti-racism training, is the next best thing to a promoter of violence in seeking social change, according to their website, and is run or has been organized by two women who have manifested in their public behavior a number of things that I think a reasonable person would regard as reprehensible. So that's another interesting thing, is that the one-sided reporting of what constitutes a threat. Anyways, they say then that they trust that these impacts were not my intention, although they certainly imply strongly that it's my fault. And that's another thing I object to, because here's the thing to think about. Imagine that there's a forest in front of you and it's extremely dry. It's extremely dry. It's been a long, hot summer, or maybe it's been a drought and there's a hot wind blowing and it's tinder dry. And there's a lot of dead wood because there hasn't been a fire for a very long time. And so the conditions are poised for a conflagration, and someone comes along and produces a spark. You can't blame the conflagration on the spark. Now, I sparked this storm, but that doesn't mean the dead wood hadn't already gathered. There's a lot of things that our society needs to talk out, and to lay the trouble that's emerged because of these videos at my feet, I think to call it an underhanded ploy is a very mild statement. It's like Jordan Peterson is responsible for this media storm about political correctness. It's like, I don't think so, much as I might like to take credit for it from a purely egotistical perspective. The groundwork for all of this was laid well before I made my videos. And the only reason they had the effect they did is because I actually said that there was something that the PC thugs want me to do that I'm not going to do. So I drew a line, and it happened to be around issues of gender nomenclature, but it could have been somewhere else. And so, of course, because of that, I've been attacked in various ways on the gender issue, which is also a very important issue, which we need to discuss. But, it could have been, in some way, it could have been any other issue where anybody else drew a line. Anyways, then they request that I stop repeating these statements. Okay, so here we go. I am not going to use made-up pronouns to refer to people at their whim. I'm not doing it, and I'm not going to be silent either, and that's that. And then they remind me that I have an obligation to uphold the law, including the Ontario Human Rights Code, and to deal fairly and ethically with students, which, I knew that there might be a legal issue, and that's why I made the videos to begin with. So that hardly came as a surprise, and I actually think it's quite comical in a darkly ironic way that the university itself is the institution that's verifying my primary concern, which was that making the video itself was likely illegal. We need to think about that, because that's a bad thing. It's a bad thing. It shows you very clearly that freedom of speech is under attack in Canada and elsewhere, of course, as well. And that's why there's been so much international attention given to this sequence of events. So they also suggest that my behavior undermines my ability to conduct essential components of your job as a faculty member. I disagree with that most vehemently. My fundamental job as a faculty member is to speak what I perceive to be the truth. And that doesn't mean I'm right, and it doesn't mean that I am speaking the truth. It's that I'm trying to speak the truth, and I'm also trying to listen to people so that I can speak the truth more carefully. And I'm not going to stop doing that, and that does not undermine my ability to conduct essential components of my job as a faculty member. In fact, that is precisely and absolutely my job as a faculty member. And then, of course, to act consistent with the law and university policy. Well, we've already covered that. I'm telling you, here we go. I said in the first video that making the video was probably illegal. And the University of Toronto agrees with me, or they wouldn't be warning me. So we need to think about that. And then there's a bit of hand-waving about the U of T deploring acts of violence and the disruption of civil debate. Well, they might deplore it, but they didn't do anything about it. And they didn't even report on it when it happened. And so I think that their claims, their fundamental claims to have, let's say, peace and safety as their primary concern, and I'm not even sure that should be the primary concern, because truth trumps peace and safety. I think that their actions, the administration's actions, do not indicate a very clear commitment to exactly the principles they claim to uphold. So, okay, so what did I do about this? Well, here's what happened. I went and met the dean, David Cameron, on Friday. I dropped in on him. He was kind of nervous as far as I could tell. He's an older guy. I think he's a decent guy. He listened to me. I think we had a very productive conversation. I went through my concerns about the letter, and then what I suggested to him was that the University of Toronto host a series of debates, a debate or a series of debates. I would like to see 3 of them, where we discuss such things as the biological determination of gender versus the environmental determination of gender identity. That would be a good debate. We could have a debate on whether Western society is an oppressive patriarchy or an enlightened civilization. I'd like to have that debate. And then the last debate would be freedom of speech. It'd be something like freedom of speech versus social justice. So that would be 3 topics. I said we could have a civilized debate. The university could host it. And we could sort these things out like civilized human beings. And maybe the University of Toronto could be a beacon on a hill, so to speak, which is what we should be. And maybe it would also help all the universities in the United States and in the Western world that are wrestling with these sorts of things, clarify the issues, and move our society ahead in a productive and peaceful way. Because I thought about, before I went into the meeting with the dean, what the best possible outcome could be, and that wouldn't be victory for me, because I'm not after victory for me. I'm after truth and peace. At least that's what I'm trying to be after. And so I thought, and I discussed this with my son and my family, what would be the best possible outcome. And one not good outcome would be the entrenchment of the 2 positions into increasingly rigid blocks and the escalation of the situation in a non-productive way. But then another productive way would be to think of this as an opportunity and say, look, man, we could have a real discussion at this university. It's a great institution. We'll shoulder our damn responsibility. We'll have a debate and we'll enlighten ourselves and the public. And so I'm going to meet with David Cameron here in about half an hour, and I'm going to find out what the university has to say about that. So thanks very much for listening. And I guess I'd close with this. I would say to my fellow Canadian citizens, you guys better wake up. The true north is no longer strong nor free, as far as I can tell. And our rights to free speech are under assault. And you better wake up, because it's not pretty and it's not good. And it's happening a lot faster than you think. One of the things that happened on Friday, it was announced in the Globe and Mail, is that the Liberal government, the Justice Minister, so-called Justice Minister, has decided that to pick our judiciary, which is one of the most important things that can happen in a country, the candidates for the judiciary now will be required to produce a dossier listing out their group identities, race, religion, sex, gender identity, gender expression, and all the things that differentiate us by group membership. And then the people who pick the judiciary are going to be subjected to unconscious re-education of their unconscious, so unconscious anti-racism and anti-bias training, so that they're not biased when they review the candidates, with the aim of selecting candidates on the basis of their identity, and I think there's nothing more racist than that, period. And so that almost passed unnoticed. And I would say, with regards to unconscious bias training, first of all, we can't measure unconscious bias very well. This is all the implicit association test, and you can look that up. We can't measure that very well because the test isn't very reliable. It was never intended to be used to document individuals' unconscious bias, but that's where this idea has come from. There's huge debate on what that bias means. Like, I don't believe it. I don't believe that it means what the proponents of unconscious racial bias say it means. The science is far from settled, and I mean far from settled. It's a serious topic of discussion, and then to educate people out of their unconscious biases, man, that's an Orwellian thing. It's one thing to control people's speech. That's bad enough, especially when you start controlling what they can say instead of what they can't say. But then to go after their unconscious minds and then to make that a precondition for the panels that select our judiciary, it's like, this isn't good, people. This isn't good. And I'm speaking as a psychologist and a student of authoritarianism and political psychopathology. So, wake up. This isn't good. Do something about it. And I've got a website started where I'm going to post things that people can do. So, but that'll happen later in the week. So, anyways, thanks for listening. That's all I've got to say for now. Bye-bye.
October 24th, 2016. U of Toronto responds to my overture. The debate is on.
Hi there. So, this is the third of 3 videos that I'm releasing this morning, and the first one, I just read the letter from the university administration requesting my silence, and then in the second one, I detailed out my response and said that I was going to meet with the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, David Cameron, and I had gone to meet with David on Friday to discuss what had happened and to discuss the letter. And we had a good meeting. And he's a reasonable person. And so I suggested, because I thought before the meeting, and I talked to my family, I thought, well, what's the best possible way this could move forward so that it would be in everyone's best interest, mine and the universities and the broader public and the students and everyone. And so we thought that the best thing to happen would be that the university could agree to host a debate, a public debate about the issue, about Bill C-16 and about legislation like it. And that would be officially hosted by the university, and I could present my case, and whoever wanted to present their case, contrary to what I've been stating, would be invited to. And so the dean, David Cameron, said that he had to talk to some people and that he would get back to me as soon as possible. And so over the weekend, he talked to Merrick Gertler, who's the president of the university, and the provost, Cheryl Regier, and the VP of HR, Kelly Hannah Moffat, and they agreed to go forward with it. And so I was thrilled, and I still am thrilled, and it's so good, because that means, one of the things we talked about was that we could talk about this like civilized human beings, and we could discuss the real issues here, and maybe as well we could use the University of Toronto as a model to all universities who've been dealing with this sort of thing about how to actually deal with it, like people who are rational and intelligent and careful and thoughtful and all of that. And so they agreed to the public debate, and we talked about 2 other issues. One was they were concerned during the meeting about the possibility of security violations, demonstrations and that sort of thing. And so they thought for a while about only holding it online, but they decided not to do that, to do it as a university function, live, which is exactly right. And we talked about security concerns and agreed, at least tentatively, that the rule would be that unwarranted disruptions will be stopped. So that, because both sides are going to be represented in this debate. And I hope they can find someone articulate and intelligent to make a case for the other side, because that's what we want. So anyways, look, this is unbelievably good news. It's unbelievably good news, because it means the university has decided to uphold its position as an investigator into complex intellectual matters, and that we can discuss this like civilized human beings. And so my kudos to the University of Toronto. And I've said from the beginning that this is an institute that I've respected and admired, and I'm grateful to for providing me with the position that I have. And I'm so absolutely thrilled that they decided to do the right thing. And not only that, and I got to tell you, and this is God's honest truth, David thanked me for bringing the issues to their attention, and he meant it. So, hooray! It's so good. So, strike one, mark one up on the wall for free speech, and for the University of Toronto. So, and I'd like to thank all the people that have been supporting me. It's been very helpful, and your letters were very useful. And, we can talk. We can talk these things through. So let's do it. Excellent. Bye.
November 6th, 2016. An update.
Hi guys, girls, and interested others. I thought I'd give you an update on the week's events. I've still been involved in discussions with the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, David Cameron, on the upcoming debate, and so I thought I'd fill you in on all of the events. But first of all, I want to make a slight detour. So one of the things that's happened to me since I put my lectures on YouTube is that I've frequently come across people claiming that I sound a fair bit like Kermit the Frog.
Hi-ho, Kermit the Frog here. Hi-ho, Kermit the Frog here. Hi-ho, Kermit the Frog here.
And wasn't really sure what to make of that. It might not have been my first choice for animal avatar, although I suppose it could be a lot worse. I mean, Kermit is a pretty good guy, and he's a decent spokesfrog, and a good organizer, and all of that. So, but anyways, I was thinking about that this morning, and I realized something, and I think it's an example of what the psychologist Carl Jung called synchronicity. Synchronicity. The simultaneous occurrence of events that appear significantly or meaningfully related, but have no discernible causal connection. And since I've been engaging in this free speech campaign, I have experienced a number of synchronous events. One of them was that when the Canadian Union of Public Employee Queer Caucus was sent the university a letter denouncing me, essentially, at exactly the same moment that letter was released, I had another Canadian Union of Public Employees president in my office who was a representative of one of the major groups on campus, who was talking to me about his concerns about the new university sexual harassment policy, which has been formulated in response to the demands of Kathleen Wynne's Ontario government, that threatens to make normal, let's call them misunderstandings, social misunderstandings, perhaps of a sexual nature, all equivalent to rape and to sexual violence. And this CUPE organization president was telling me about his concerns that that's going to put tremendous stress on the interactions between the people that he has to represent. So that was an interesting juxtaposition. He couldn't find anybody in the University of Administration to properly address his concerns. But then the frog issue, well, here's something cool. So you'll notice these sculptures behind me. They're made by an artist, a native artist named Charles Joseph. And Charles Joseph is a friend and now a brother of mine. As I've been inducted into their tribal group, which happened, by the way, the same week that I was being accused of being a racist by many people on the University of Toronto campus. So that was another major act of synchronicity as far as I was concerned. But one thing that's kind of cool is that I had this mask made by Charles a while back, and this is a frog. So there now, I've got my Kwakwaka'wakw. The Kwakwaka'wakw people are a tribal people who live on the west coast of Vancouver Island, and they have a remarkable artistic tradition, which I've been very interested in. And I've had a lot of work done by Charles, who, as I said, is a residential school survivor. And he made this beautiful frog hat for me. And here's something cool, too. So I asked Charles about the significance of the frog in Kwakwaka'wakw mythology, and he said the frog is a harbinger of dangerous times, because if anything pollutes the waters, then the frogs disappear. And of course, that did happen almost all around the world a few years ago, and because the frogs have very sensitive skin, and so they pick up anything that has gone wrong, and it interferes with their ability to reproduce and to live. And so I would say that as spokesfrog, I'm announcing that there's something polluted about the water in which we're all swimming, and that we better clean it up, or there's going to be trouble. So there's a bit of synchronicity for you. So what I've been doing this week is working out the details of the debate with the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Science, David Cameron. And I met him Monday, November 1st, in the meeting, he threw a curveball at me, I would say. He said that if the debate was going to go forward, the university couldn't allow it to go forward if I was going to repeat my assertion that I would not use gender-neutral pronouns to refer to people if they asked me to do so. And you may know that the university has already sent me 2 warning letters telling me that my refusal to use these pronouns is in violation of university policy. We'll get to that in a while. And also contravenes the Ontario Human Rights Code. And also that as my employer, the university is as responsible for my speech acts as I am. And of course I did know that because that's exactly why I made the videos to begin with, and that's exactly what I said in the videos. And so the university is distancing itself from me because they know that if I get called for my hate speech because of my refusal to use these pronouns, then the university is just as guilty as I am. So what they're doing is setting up a series of legal documents that are designed to show that they acted in good faith trying to discipline a wayward employee who is contravening these policies. And David implied quite strongly, I would say, that with each of those assertions, the probability that I will be able to teach at the University of Toronto come 2017 when I start my undergraduate teaching is diminishing. And so I knew that, but it was still a shock to hear it. And then, of course, that put me in a conundrum because I wasn't sure if it was reasonable for me to proceed with the debate because it's a debate about free speech, say, if a arbitrary restriction was placed on what I was able to say. And so initially I thought, well, that I could proceed with the debate because I really want to talk about Bill C-16 and issues that are larger scale than my mere refusal to use these pronouns. But then I went home and I really thought about it, and I talked with my family because we thought it was perverse in some sense that in this debate, the debate would begin with a significant restriction on what I was allowed to say. So I wrote a letter, which I'm going to read to you. I wrote this on Tuesday, November 2nd, and I sent it to Merrick Gertler, who's the president of the University of Toronto, Siobhan Nelson, Dean, Faculty of Arts and Science, the vice provost, who was a signatory of the second letter I received from the university, the one asking me not to repeat my assertions anymore, asking me to silence myself, to Cheryl Regier, who's the vice president and provost, to Kelly Hannah Moffat, vice president, Human Resources and Equity. Hannah Moffat is still working with the Black Liberation Collective, by the way, despite the fact that on their website they refuse to disavow violence in their pursuit of social change, and also were started and continue to be strongly influenced by 2 people of, let's say, dubious reputation. You can read about them online if you want. And also Suzanne Ferber, who's the chair of the Department of Psychology, who gave me the first of the 2 warning letters. So what the university is doing is setting themselves up so that if I'm taken to court, and they're taken to court along with me, then they can claim that they've done everything they possibly can to rein in this abusive professor who refuses to let other people determine the words that he says. And so this is the letter I wrote. Dear Dean Cameron, yesterday you indicated that if the debate were to proceed, and if I repeated my insistence that I would not use gender-neutral pronouns during that debate, the university would find itself in an untenable legal position. This is because, number 1, use of those pronouns is mandated by university policy and the Ontario Human Rights Act and its surrounding policies as laid out, for example, on the Ontario Human Rights Commission website. And 2, under those laws and policies, employers are responsible for the statements of their employees as if they were making the statements themselves. Thus, if the university hosts this debate, providing me with a platform for my views, and I restated my intention to refuse use of the mandated pronouns, and legal action ensued, the university would not have properly upheld its legal obligation to ensure that its employees follow the requisite laws. You also indicated that if I continue to insist publicly that I will not use the mandated pronouns, the university may also be required to suspend my courses beginning in January. You suggested, therefore, that I agree during the debate not to repeat my refusal to use gender-neutral pronouns so as not to further compromise the university and to allow the debate to go forward. I said at our meeting that I would consider this, and I have. I cannot abide by this request. Part of the discussion that needs to be had, during and outside of the debate, is precisely what the university should do because of my refusal. Here are the options. Number one, the university can continue to insist upon my silence based on its understanding that my actions are currently legal. Based on its understanding that my actions are currently illegal. On its concern, A, that refusing to use gender-neutral pronouns is illegal, and more precisely, B, that my statement that I would refuse to use them if asked is also illegal. It can then continue to take whatever actions it deems necessary to distance itself from me and my opinions. Option 2. The university can reaffirm its commitment to its Statement on Freedom of Speech, written in May 1992, which explicitly states that, quote, the essential purpose of the university is to engage in the pursuit of truth, the advancement of learning, and the dissemination of knowledge. To achieve this purpose, all members of the university must have as a prerequisite freedom of speech and expression, which means the right to examine, question, investigate, speculate, and comment on any issue without reference to prescribed doctrine, as well as the right to criticize the university and society at large. The existence of an institution where unorthodox ideas, alternative modes of thinking and living, and radical prescriptions for social ills can be debated contributes immensely to social and political change and the advancement of human rights both inside and outside the university. Often this debate may generate controversy and disputes among members of the university and the wider community. In such cases, the university's primary obligation is to protect the free speech of all involved. The university must allow the fullest range of debate. It should not limit that debate by preordaining conclusions or punishing or inhibiting the reasonable exercise of free speech. And I said, the university must decide. It can express option 1, which, in my opinion, means sacrificing its commitment to free speech as expressly laid out in the aforementioned statement. Or it can accept option 2, defending my right to, quote, criticize the university and society at large, end quote, by all legal means necessary. This would mean throwing its support behind me and fighting the restrictive legislation embodied in the Ontario Human Rights Act and associated policies, and soon to be instantiated in Federal Bill C-16, all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, if necessary. I understand that the statement also says that, quote, the purpose of the university also depends on an environment of tolerance and mutual respect. Every member should be able to work, live, teach, and learn in a university free from discrimination and harassment, end quote. My actions have been deemed by some to constitute discrimination. So the two major principles outlined in the statement are now in conflict, and the university and our society at large has to decide which one takes priority. As Professor Jonathan Haidt, Professor of Ethical Leadership at NYU's Stern School of Business, recently indicated, in the US, universities must choose one telos, that's guiding principle, social justice or truth. I have similarly juxtaposed social justice and freedom of expression and chose the latter. Make your decision. I've made mine. May God himself help us live with the consequences. Now, Jonathan Haidt, I'm going to read you a little bit about what he wrote. He wrote this last week, and I'll set up the link and the video in the comments on this video so you can look at it. Jonathan Haidt, who's a very good political psychologist, by the way, says no university can have truth and social justice as dual teloses, final goals. John Stuart Mill is the patron saint of what all call Truth University, which sees truth as a process in which flawed individuals challenge each other's biased and incomplete reasoning. In the process, all become smarter. Truth U dies when it becomes intellectually uniform or politically orthodox. Karl Marx is the patron saint of Social Justice U, which is oriented around changing the world in part by overthrowing power structures and privilege. It sees political diversity as an obstacle to action. Each university must pick one. All right, so now David Cameron, the dean, wrote me back. That's the same day, which is what I requested. And he said, I have reviewed your letter dated November 2nd, 2016. I do not agree with the way that you have framed our conversation, which was a good faith attempt to find a way to identify terms of reference that would allow for you, as an academic, to engage in a discussion about your views regarding the provisions of the Ontario Human Rights Code that have protected against discrimination based on gender identity and gender expression since 2012. That's the similar legislation in Ontario, as well as similar amendments that are being considered federally in Bill C-16. David repeats his commitment to the forum. The university is quite prepared to host a forum where arguments are presented concerning the gender identity and gender expression protections of the Ontario Human Rights Code or those being considered under Bill C-16. Arguments are presented concerning freedom of expression and how it should properly relate to non-discrimination protections that exist in Canadian law. Arguments are presented as to any alternatives that might be preferable, and or discussants listen to and respond to arguments of colleagues who may have different views on these subjects. The university cannot host a forum that will offer a platform for an expressed intention to engage in conduct with your students and colleagues that you appear to have acknowledged would be in violation of the Ontario Human Rights Code. If you wish to engage in a further discussion about this way of proceeding with the scholarly forum, we would be glad to receive your written comments. Yours sincerely, David Cameron, Dean, Faculty of Arts and Science. So, I slept on that, and I'll tell you what I decided to do. So I talked it over again with my family and some friends who've been following this and who are wise people. And then I also thought about this in mythological terms, so I'll give you the context of that. So one of the oldest stories we have, that's the story in Genesis, indicates that the environments that people find themselves in at an archetypal level, so this is all human environments, could be likened to a garden, a walled garden. Paradisa means walled garden, and Eden means well-watered place, by the way. And so Genesis presents the proper environment for human beings as a garden with walls, a well-watered garden with walls. And so that's a combination of culture and nature. The walls are culture and the garden itself is nature. And so human beings live in an environment that's always partly nature and partly culture. And those two things need to be kept in proper balance. But the thing about the garden is that there's always a snake in the garden. And it's like the idea that there's a snake in the garden. There is the idea that nothing can exist without a flaw. Nothing can actually exist that doesn't have a serious flaw. And the same idea is expressed in certain Asian ideas. For example, the beautiful Buddhist gardens in Japan, very carefully manicured, always have a flaw, as often do certain forms of Japanese pottery. And it expresses the same idea that reality to exist must be allowed to have its flaws. And the yin and yang symbol is like that too, because in the chaos serpent, there's a white dot that indicates that in every chaotic circumstance, order can emerge, and in the white serpent, there's a black dot, which indicates that in every orderly place that a chaotic element can emerge. But you can't get away from the tension of opposites. And so I thought, well, it's necessary for this debate to proceed because it's important. And I want the topics here to be aired properly and thoroughly. And it would be better for the university to host it. I very seriously considered renting a theater and just making my views known there. But I thought that's not as good as having the other side have its opportunity to have their concerns noted. And I agreed that I would provide my arguments, at least an outline of my arguments, to my opposition, let's say, or to the people on the other side of the discussion beforehand so that they had a chance to marshal their arguments. And so I decided that despite this restriction, which is still, the precise nature of which is still to be determined, that it would be better, all things considered, to go ahead with the debate. And so it looks like it's likely to occur sometime in the next 2 weeks, and that's that. But I would like to close by noting that the university appears to have made its choice. And when I met David on Friday, we had a somewhat more heated exchange, still friendly, I would say, where I suggested that the university is making a big mistake here, and that they have to make a decision, as Jonathan Haidt said, about which side they're on, and that if the university has substantial legal resources, and if they were as concerned about free speech as I think they should be, and as their own policy, which I'm supposed to abide by the way, because I'm supposed to abide by university policies, the university policy on free speech, which I think is its highest order policy, suggests that I have the right, or perhaps maybe even the obligation, to criticize the university and society at large without reference to any preordained conclusions. And so I strongly suggested to David that the university is on the wrong side of this, that they picked the side of the social justice warriors over the side of freedom of expression, or perhaps even, as Jonathan Haidt has pointed out, perhaps even over truth, and that's a huge mistake, that they're violating the most fundamental principle upon which the university is predicated, and I sincerely believe that to be the case. But I've decided to go forward with the debate because I believe that a flawed debate is better than none, and perhaps all you can hope for in the world of actuality is a flawed process that can grope and struggle, however wretchedly and awkwardly, towards something that might be regarded as the truth. So make no mistake about it, this is what's happened. The university has drawn the lines, and they have decided that if they have to support political correctness / social justice, neo-Marxism, or freedom of speech, then they're going to pick the former and not the latter. And so that's the state of the art at perhaps Canada's greatest educational institution. And I would say that's also a diagnostic indicator of the, shall we call it, the state of the polluted waterworks that make up our current culture. And as spokesfrog for the nation, let's say, I'm stating quite bluntly that we better clean up our act, or there's going to be hell to pay.
It's not easy being green, having to spend each day the color of the leaves, when I think it might be nicer being red or yellow or gold or something much more colorful like that.
November 11th, 2016. I discuss order and chaos with Theron Meyer, reasonable trans person.
Okay, looks like everything is in order. Hello, everyone. I'm here with Dr. Jordan Peterson, and a lot of you probably know of him, and he's been making quite the buzz. Hi, Jordan. Thank you so much for joining me on this chat. I'm really excited to get to the topics at hand. How are you doing today?
Good. Tired, but good.
Yeah? Well, that's good. I know you told me that there are some very specific things that you'd like to kind of talk with me about today. Because we don't have much time, I just want to kind of jump right into it. So you wanted to talk a bit about postmodernism and their view on categories. Did you want to just kind of...
Yeah, well, there's something I've been trying to... I mean, obviously, this discussion about pronouns has attracted a tremendous amount of attention, and it's attracted a tremendous amount of attention for complex reasons that it's not obvious why everyone would focus on it for such a long period of time. It's been about 40 days now, about 130 print articles, and I would say maybe upwards of 3 million people have been watching the goings-on online. We haven't even counted the number of YouTube videos and that sort of thing that have been generated as a consequence of it, and the 2 demonstrations at the University of Toronto and the exchange of letters. It's been absurdly controversial. And that means that there's something going on that people really haven't put their finger on. And I've been thinking about it at multiple levels of analysis. And there's one very deep level of analysis that I don't think anyone has addressed. And I would think about it as a cognitive level of analysis. And it has to do with the nature of categorization itself. So I remember a long while back, I read a paper on why human beings have 2 hemispheres, a right hemisphere and a left hemisphere. And roughly speaking, the left hemisphere, and this is very roughly speaking, the left/linguistic hemisphere attempts to impose predictable structure on the world, simplifying it. It's not exactly an ideological simplification. It's more like a practical simplification, because the world is so complex that unless you chunk it into categories, it overwhelms you. And so you have to chunk it into categories. And those categories aren't exactly descriptions of things or objects. They're more like tools for operating in the world. And then the right hemisphere keeps track of anomalies and exceptions and tries to build those slowly into the category system so that it doesn't blow the category system. And so there was an example of this that a researcher named Goldberg offered. He had trained a neural network to recognize images of fish and the same neural network to recognize images of birds. But when he showed it a penguin, then it blew the category structure so that all fish became birds and all birds became fish. Now, the postmodernists like Derrida claimed that category structures were primarily tools of power and oppression, which to me is an absurd claim, because that's not their primary use, even though that may be one of their consequences and one of their occasional uses. And he became very, very concerned about who the category systems marginalized and what the consequence of that was for them. And that got tangled in a sense into the Marxist identity politics routine, because the Marxist identity politics people picked up the idea of the excluded and marginalized and sort of transformed them into the equivalent of Marx's oppressed working class, and then started to agitate for them. And the Democrats in the United States, for example, transformed their focus from working class concerns, say, to identity politics concerns. And there's been some notion that that was part of the resurgence of Marxism as an ideological doctrine. Anyways, it's a really fundamental problem. The problem, the categories exclude, but then if you include the excluded in the category, you blow the category structure. Now, this is partly why the right-wing Christians, for example, were so opposed to the idea of homosexual marriage. So what's happening very rapidly is that because the binary category has been, let's say, violated, that's one way of thinking about it, you get an explosion of chaotic identities. And so it's gone from, say, 2 to the proposed, I suppose, 3, which would have been what the formulators of the legislation, I think, were hoping for, to, say, 31 in New York and 70 online. And then there's this additional explosion, which is being promoted by people who aren't really concerned so much with the categories of gender identity, but with other categories like human versus non-human identity. And so those are the people that have become known as otherkins, or even transabled, right, who are claiming, but on the same logical grounds. That's the problem. It's on the same logical grounds, is they're claiming a non-categorical identity that transcends the human. And if it's only subjective, then there's no, and you already agree with the first step, there's no way of logically agreeing with the second step. And so it's a really interesting example of how, say, binary categories maintain order. And then if you violate them to include those who are excluded, what you produce is an upswelling of unmanageable chaos, which seems to be the state we're in. So one of the things I wanted to ask you is, I think this is happening. This has happened on 2 fronts. It's happened with the requests of gay people to be included in marriage, and then now it's happened as a consequence of the request of transgendered people to be included in although flipping the gender categories. And it's especially true with the so-called non-binary gendered types. And so I just wondered what you think about all that.
Wow, there's so much. So I've been thinking about this a lot, maybe not in the same kind of use of the same words, but very much along the same lines. And I think it's interesting that you talk about categories. One could look at it also as not just the violation or the changing of the definition of a category, but the creation of an entirely new category, not just male, female, but now an entirely new category, which not necessarily threatens male and female, but it threatens the dichotomy, as you said, the binary. I find it interesting because I can't see how there is any third gender, because there is nothing more than male and female. I mean, where does this come from? There's nothing more than male, female, and maybe like.
Well, that's exactly the problem of that's right. Well, that's exactly the problem of the category, is that once you're outside that, then you're anywhere, as far as I can tell.
And if you can create an identity out of nothing, based out of nothing in reality, then you're basically claiming the status of a demigod, and it just doesn't make sense.
Well, in fact, the otherkins are consciously claiming the status of demigods, because they proclaim that they are such creatures as elves or fairies or orcs or whatever their imagination conjures up. But that's the other thing too, is that in Bill C-16, there's actually an assault on the concept of reality, because identity is technically unmoored from its biological substrate. And so that means it's unmoored from the objective. And as soon as it's unmoored from the objective, then it's subjective and in principle can be anything. So I mean, and here's a problem with the classically transgendered people, and I presume that you would fit into that category. The argument isn't so much about the category of gender. The argument is about which category you're going to be in. But then what that seems to do is immediately open the door, or has opened the door to, I would say, a philosophical assault on the concept of gender itself, that culminated, for example, in Dr. Nicholas Matt's claim on TVO's The Agenda, when he was debating me, that there were no biological differences between men and women, and that's what the science over the last 4 decades has claimed. A remarkable claim.
Basically, it's not correct that there is such a thing as biological sex. And I'm a historian of medicine. I can unpack that for you at great length if you want, but in the interest of time, I won't. So that's a very popular misconception. So essentially, when in my transgender studies classes, what we're doing is looking at actual research and identifying ways that current social issues related to trans people, or things that are associated with trans, such as free speech arguments and claims, how that connects to the way that people are thinking, the way that research has been framed, the histories.
Give us some of the other pronouns.
And then the dissolution of identity into this unbelievable chaos that even appears to transcend the dimensions of species. I got an article today from a viewer in England who sent me the transcripts, I believe it was of a German philosopher's talk, who claimed that our recognition of the biological sex of animals is nothing but an artificial imposition of a arbitrary ideological construct, which is exactly what you'd claim if you decided that the underlying biology was irrelevant. This is why I think the evolutionary biologists are next in the sights of the social justice warriors.
Absolutely. I think there is a degree to which even traditional transgender people do still, maybe not assault, but certainly threaten the category of male and female. Certainly, I try to argue for why we need to consider a definition of women that maybe includes someone like me. I don't demand it. I just argue for it. But then there's the other thing, the other matter that you seem to talk about more, which is the inclusion of a new category such as non-binary, and what that means to the meaning of gender. But I think including a trans woman into the category of women, maybe not equally, but similarly, threatens the definition of gender in a similar way. Maybe not assaults. What do you
Well,
think?
it definitely destabilizes it, and the question is, what exactly should be done about that? Because, you know, there's been a claim among, say, Western philosophers since the beginning of the philosophical tradition, that the basis of civilization itself, the structural basis, is roughly speaking the nuclear family. And another thing I think that's come under assault, and this is certainly something that was picked up by the Christian fundamentalists early, was that the dissolution of these category structures also begins to destabilize the nuclear family. And the problem with that is we don't exactly know what the consequences of that will be. We do know, the scientific literature is quite clear on this as far as I'm concerned. Children who are raised in intact families with two biological parents do far better on pretty much everything that's measured. And so now, of course, the problem with the family, and you can see this reflected in, say, Kathleen Wynne's new legislation on, I think it's called All Families Are Equal, that's the bill, is that if any arrangement whatsoever between people can be family, then there's no such thing as family anymore. And if there's no such thing as family, well, then we don't know what will happen. And the problem, too, is that it seems to me that it's in the interest of people who do not fit easily into categories to not destabilize the main culture too badly. And there's a reason for that, is the main culture right now is actually pretty tolerant. If you destabilize a culture enough, it will become rapidly intolerant. And then the first thing that happens is those who are identifiably different are the first targets of an intolerant culture. So it seems to me that it's incumbent on the LBGT, etc. community, if they want to request inclusion, then they also have to figure out how that can be done in a way that doesn't destabilize the entire category structure, because it risks doing that. So now you had some arguments about why the category of woman should be expanded to include people like you. Now, obviously, you're doing everything in your power to present yourself to the world in a manner that makes you easily categorizable.
Absolutely. And I guess I don't necessarily even think of it that way. You know, I don't think I want to be seen as a woman, so I'm going to do all these things to be viewed as woman. I do all these things because I am a woman. I do all these things just because it comes naturally to me. And the end product happens to be a subject that in people's minds is easily registerable.
Well, that's also, I would say, that's an act of politeness on your part. You know, so one of the things people concluded when I first made my videos is that I wouldn't use he or she to refer to, well, say someone like yourself who wants to be referred to as she. And my attitude about that was never that. But having thought through it further, I also realized that my natural behavioral proclivity, and I think that of most people, is to refer to someone by the pronoun that addresses their appearance. Because it's a pronoun use is actually rather casual, right? You do it unthinkingly and automatically. And you address a person in keeping with the manner in which they manifest themselves. And you're doing that. And you're saying that that's also, or maybe even primarily, a manifestation of an inner drive. But obviously the manner in which that inner drive manifests itself is also socially, it's part of a social negotiation.
Of course. And that's probably my argument for choosing a definition of woman that includes me, because for the sake of communication, it just makes sense. Language is what we use to communicate with one another. We don't want to corrupt it. The better we communicate the real world to one another, the better we use language. And I think there would actually be more confusion if people referred to me as he and sir and stuff.
Right. Okay. So part of your case is that there's actually no way of addressing you that doesn't produce some confusion, and so using she is the simplest.
Produces less confusion.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting argument. Okay. So what would you say if I said you could make a case that your mere existence is a threat to categorical order? And so I could say that your duty as a consequence, despite the potential violation of your own sense of self, would be to what? To deny your own inner impulses and conform, because not doing so I understand that that comes at a personal cost, and I'm not trying to minimize that cost. And I'm also not saying that you should do this, but
No, I understand.
I think you could make a case that it's like the social obligation of someone who doesn't fit into a fundamental category to tricky one, man, to fit in regardless because it's so threatening not to. No. I mean, you could make the same case about artists. That's the problem, right? You could make the same case about anyone that doesn't fit in. And often people who don't fit in are necessary. So it's a very tricky thing to think through.
Well, I'd like to come back to the argument for usefulness of language. Like how useful is a definition of women? You know, for the most part, using a definition of women, someone who was born with XX chromosomes and you know, can give birth and, you know, all of those things, it's very useful because it describes the vast majority of cases that you will find in real world.
Right. And it facilitates certain kinds of interactions. I mean, obviously there's...
So I don't see that it's necessarily conflicting to consider in a given situation where someone maybe was not born biologically female, to consider the use of a different definition of women if it's communicatively useful. And that way we don't have to threaten categories because we are still committed to.
Okay. So let me ask you some questions about that. So let's assume that your point is well taken. Then I might say, if you're born a man and you wish to be treated as a woman, what are the minimal obligations that you have to undertake in order to be granted that, let's say, privilege? You know, because the way this is framed, right, the way it's been framed in discussions with me so far is that it's a matter of respect to use someone's pronouns. And I think that's nonsense, because when I see people on the street and I refer to them as he or she, it has nothing to do with respect. It's just the most casual of communication intents. And so I don't buy the respect thing. But let's say you're making a case that the most straightforward thing is to include you or people that are in the same position as you. So what do you think your obligations are, your responsibilities are to the social compact, let's say, in order to be given that, I got to say privilege, it's something like that, because
That's
it's an
okay.
exception. Right?
Privilege is fine with me. I think that considering that, my answer to that question would be to be regarded as the gender that you identify as commonsensically within your culture. Maybe that's your obligation.
Yeah, okay. Well, that seems to be at least reasonable, because at least then you don't make it any more awkward for people to interact with you than it has to be. I was talking to an artist the other day named Jonathan Pageau, and we were talking about the issue of non-categorical identity. And he was talking to me about mythological stories of the welcoming of strangers. There's a very strong tradition of hospitality in most cultures. And if a stranger shows up, you're to welcome them into your house. But they're supposed to behave when they're in your house. So they're not supposed to steal your... Right, and rape your women and so forth. Right?
Yes, exactly.
So there's an obligation on both sides.
Yes. Like what Gavin McInnes said about trans women who transition from male to female. He said that, you know, if you're going to go to Japan and you're going to go live in Japan, you need to speak their language, communicate with them, adopt their customs, take your shoes off when you enter the house, refer by their last name, all these things. That's just what you do. That's what a stranger does if they don't want to be considered a stranger anymore.
Right, exactly that.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that there needs to be a discussion about responsibilities. If the excluded other wants to be included, the way to be included isn't to blow apart the category structure. It's to behave nicely when you're welcomed into the house. It's something like that. Okay, so I've got a more vicious question to ask you, I would say. This is a rough one, man.
The majority of this live stream would be considered transphobic by probably the majority of trans people. I love it. I think this is such good conversation.
Okay. So here's another problem. One of the things that I've been thinking through the last couple of weeks is the idea of discrimination, because discrimination and judgment and categorization aren't that easy to tell apart. And you have to be discriminating or you'll do anything all the time. So you have to make choices and you have to exclude. Now, one of the things that's very characteristic about female sexual behavior, among human beings is it's very exclusionary. So, for example, among chimpanzees, the females are promiscuous maters. Now, the dominant males have more offspring, but that's because they chase the subordinate males away from the females when they're in estrus, when they're in heat. The females that are in heat, they'll mate with any male. The dominant males chase away the subordinate males so they get more offspring, but it has nothing to do with female, let's say, preference. Human beings are very strange in this regard, and this is maybe why we're so different from chimpanzees, even though we share a common ancestor. And one of the big differences is that human females are very, very choosy sexually. And so this is why, for example, you have twice as many female ancestors as male ancestors. And it's a hard thing to think about conceptually, but basically it means that on average, you'd get that outcome if on average every female produced 2 offspring and every male only produced 1. Now that would mean some males produce far more than 1 and some produce 0. So there's differential sexual success in males and females and human beings. And it's because of female sexual selectivity. So this is what females choose for. They choose men who are across or above them in dominance hierarchies. They tend to choose for health. They tend to choose for appearance. They tend to choose for productivity that's manifested often in status, and so forth. And so what that means is that a minority of males are found very sexually attractive and the majority of males not. So my point is that one of the most fundamental rights that, say, feminists want to retain is the right to absolute sexual choice in their partners. But they don't understand that that's based on exactly the forms of discrimination that they're always arguing against. So because people sleep with someone of their own race, they sleep with someone of their own religion, roughly the same age. They generally go after healthy people. They generally go after attractive people. And so every single dimension of discrimination that you can possibly imagine governs sexual choice. If you completely eradicate the justification for discrimination, which I would also say is the same justification for freedom of association, you also blow out the element of sexual choice. Now, the question I wanted to ask you is, considering you as a potential sexual partner is going to be distressing to the majority of people, is that acceptable?
Yes.
Why?
Because I'm an anomaly. It's just not something people are comfortable with. The fact that I was born a different way than I am now, even if they are attracted to me, it makes my dating life a bit harder,
right,
more complicated. But
definitely,
I mean, I'm a huge proponent of discrimination. I think that's 100% within people's rights. I would never call someone transphobic because they don't want to sleep with me because I was born one way and don't. That's their preference. That's their prerogative. It's 100% people's right to discriminate.
So do you think that there's any ways, obviously you've thought this through a lot, like the part of the problem here is that distinguishing that from forbidden forms of discrimination is very, very difficult conceptually. Like it's not obvious why it's okay to discriminate against someone sexually. This happened in Brave New World, in Huxley's novel, where any form of sexual discrimination was regarded as socially inappropriate, such that if someone asked you to have sex with them, it was your moral obligation not only to do it, but to be happy about it. The basic hypothesis was, or the basic slogan was, everyone belongs to everyone else. That's the final limit of the absence of discrimination. So, but why do you think that discrimination of that sort is okay?
I believe in equality and lack of discrimination, equal treatment under the law. That is kind of where it ends for me.
Right.
Very much free market in my thinking.
Well, that free market example is an interesting one, because maybe the reason that it's okay for other people to discriminate is because we want to retain the right for ourselves to discriminate. Because maybe it's something like you're willing to have people reject you as a potential sexual partner as long as you're also allowed the privilege to reject other people as potential sexual partners.
Take the example, the whole transgender people in washrooms thing. I believed when that was going on, it's kind of died down now, but I believe when that was going on, that the state shouldn't be saying trans people aren't allowed in the washroom of their choosing or shouldn't. I was like, that's up to the business owners to make that decision. Is there's a business down the road, a restaurant that wouldn't let me, use the washroom, the female washroom, so be it. I'll just go to a different restaurant. And that's what I'm very free market thinking. And I And I think discrimination is something that the right to discriminate is something that needs to be protected at all costs.
Well, it certainly seems to have to be protected to some degree. Like, I think the sexual choice conundrum, I mean, there are horrors on both sides of it, right? The first horror is, well, if you obliterate sexual discrimination, then you have to allow yourself to be the sexual target of whoever, whenever. That seems like a pretty bad solution. And it's certainly not one that I think particularly women would rapidly accept.
And that's such an assault on individual's agency.
Right. It's the ultimate assault on an individual's agency. But the problem is to maintain that right to choice is to also maintain the right to discriminate. And then putting the boundaries on what you're allowed to discriminate against is very, very tricky. Like, I think we've gone far too far in the anti-discrimination direction. It's very difficult for people on campuses now to aggregate themselves in gender uniform groups. And I'm not sure that's a good idea. Like, it seems to me that men should be allowed to hang around with men if they want to, and that women should be allowed to hang around with women when they want to, and that actually that right might be necessary for the proper development of masculinity and femininity. One final thing, this is another horrible thing that no one ever talks about. I mean, the data suggests that men who are homosexual have a very large number of sexual partners. And that makes sense to me, because men tend not to say no to sexual opportunities. And so if you have man with man, it's like no one says no. So there's lots of sexual activity. So one of the things I'm curious about is if marriage is expanded on any other grounds merely than the legal grounds, which I think aren't sufficient to even maintain marriage as an institution. If marriage is expanded to include same-sex couples, say, what are the obligations of the same-sex couples once they're actually married? So does that mean that, and I know the literature on this, that the suggestion is that most male homosexuals who get married don't give up their promiscuous ways. Well, it seems to me that if you don't give up your promiscuous ways, then you're actually not playing the game of marriage. And that's one of the discussions about responsibility that I don't think has been had in public life. If you want to be part of the game, then in principle, you also have to follow the rules. That doesn't mean everyone who's heterosexual, who's married.
I agree. Lest you absolutely obliterate the very fundamental building blocks of a society and a culture. That's what happens when you violate very important categories like marriage.
Right, that's right. We don't know what the fundamentals. We don't really understand the fundamentals. I mean, people have made philosophical claims. I would say gender identity is a fundamental. Children learn that very early, and marriage is a fundamental, and the nuclear family is a fundamental. And we have no idea how many of those fundamentals can be challenged before the whole bloody thing shakes and falls down. And unless you want it to shake and fall down. All right, so good. Well, that was good. So maybe we'll get a chance to do this again.
Everyone, please check the link below to register for the Right to Offend conference on November 19th. It's going to be great. We'll be talking about similar topics surrounding political correctness, free speech, and so on. And I wanted to have this live stream because Dr. Peterson wouldn't be able to make it in person for that conference. So I just wanted to use this time to promote it. Thank you so much, Dr. Peterson.
All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
November 16th, 2016. The debate and a letter from a viewer.
Hi guys. So a quick update. Now, I'm going to be having a debate Saturday at 9:30 in the morning Eastern Standard Time, and it'll be live cast on Jordan Peterson videos on YouTube. The participants will be Mayo Moran, who's the moderator. She's a professor of law and the provost at Trinity College, University of Toronto. I'll be debating Mary Bryson, who's a professor of education and senior associate dean, administration and innovation at the University of British Columbia, and Brenda Kostman, who's professor of law and director of the Bonham Centre for Sexual Diversity Studies at the University of Toronto. She'll undoubtedly tell me that I don't really understand Bill C-16 and the legislation that I'm commenting on, but we'll see about that. So, of course, since the debate has been announced, the PC authoritarians are in an uproar because, well, as Huffington Post Canada blogger Ido Katri pointed out, the university met my demands for holding a public debate. Well, I want to just mention a few things about that because first of all, he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. And so, well, let's just say that he's uninformed. I didn't demand that the university hold a debate. I met with the dean after receiving 2 letters from the university warning me to stop doing what I was doing. And I suggested, given the uproar that surrounded the videos, that there was something that should be talked out and that the university could perhaps model civilized conversation about such complex topics. And so I was in no position to demand anything. So it's typical of I would say, the PC authoritarian ideology or ideologue misuse of language. You can bend the story to suit your perspective without really giving any second thought to the truth. And of course, he commented, the University of Toronto is providing yet another stage for spreading uninformed fear and hate. Well, you can make what you want out of that. I don't know what exactly he means by yet another stage. I mean, they certainly didn't provide me with my first stage, and of course I wasn't spreading uninformed fear and hate to begin with, but I would say that's just typical of the behavior of the people on the PC authoritarian part of the political spectrum. So, what else is new? Well, Leonard Cohen died, so that really was too bad because he was great.
It's coming through a hole in the air from those nads in Tiananmen Square.
That's the big news in Canada. And then, of course, Donald Trump was elected this week.
Sorry to keep you waiting. Complicated business. Complicated.
And why was that? Well, there were a variety of reasons, of course, but I think that the simplest explanation was that in the mid-70s, the Democrats abandoned the working class to play identity politics. And that's too bad because the working class really needs a voice in politics. And part of the reason for that is that there is a proclivity in societies for the winner to take all, fundamentally, in monetary circumstances. And so that accounts for the rise not so much of the 1%, but of the 1/10 of 1/10 of 1%. And it is a constant societal battle to ensure that economic resources are funneled in some manner down to the people who are near the bottom of the dominance hierarchy. So the working class needs a voice, but it's not the Democrats, and that's why the Rust Belt abandoned them and cost Hillary Clinton the election. The identity politics people are not interested in the individual. This is sort of their defining characteristic, and for them, group membership is all that counts. I was thinking today, if you told a Kentucky coal miner this story about people demanding their own pronouns, the first thing he'd think is, man, I'm voting Trump. And, you know, it's hardly surprising. So anyhow, that's what happened in the U.S. So, back to the topic at hand. I want to review the PC game again, and this is the game that the Democrats have been playing, especially on the left, instead of focusing, as they should be focusing, on the economic concerns of people who are disadvantaged, regardless of their group identity. To play the PC game, you identify an area of human activity. That can be any area of human activity, from sports to economic activity. You note that there's a distribution of success in that area of activity, like there is in every human activity. There's some people who are good at whatever it is that's being done, and some people who are less good. And of course, the people who are good at it do better, and the people who are not as good do worse. So you identify the winners and the losers. Then you claim that the losers are losing because they're oppressed by the winners. That way you can dispense with any such thing as competence, for example, or fail to notice the effect that, say, hard work has on fostering success. I know that there are campuses in the United States now where it's considered a microaggression to make the claim that people who work hard make more money than people who don't work hard. Anyways, you can also claim then, once you've claimed that the losers are losing because they're oppressed by the winners, you can claim unearned allegiance with the losers. Feel secure in your comprehensive explanation of the world because you've got everything wrapped up. You've got 5 axioms. That's all you need. You can explain everything with them. Then you can revel in your moral superiority. And you have the additional benefit of being able to target your resentment towards your newly discovered enemies. So any rot or blackness that you happen to be harboring in your soul, you can vent towards these people that are hypothetical oppressors, and that means that you can be a terrible person and you can feel good about it at the same time. Then you can repeat that forever in every possible circumstance everywhere, and that's the PC game. Now, we've been looking into that a fair bit with our research. I'm working very hard with my graduate student, Christine Brophy, right now, my PhD student, trying to get our first paper on political correctness ready for release. But I can give you some information about it. We did a video with Rebel Media, but we weren't as articulate as we might have been about it, so I'm going to give it another shot here. So, before I do that, another element of the PC game, and this is part of the PC philosophy. Define injustice as inequality of outcome. I'd like to give you an update about the University of Toronto Human Resource and Equity Department's training material. They decided they were going to make anti-bias and anti-racism training mandatory for their staff, and I made my second video back in late September about that, and somebody slipped the training material underneath my door. And one of the things I found out that was absolutely distressing was that the consultant who was hired to do the anti-racism and anti-bias training was attempting to teach, let's say, but I would say indoctrinate the staff into how to analyze an organization to decide if it was oppressive. And so basically what you do is you take the organization, imagine that it's a pyramid and it has different strata, then you assess each strata, you assess it demographically. So you assess it by group identity, race, gender, and so forth. I suppose sexual preference and all the other things that the PC authoritarians like to go on and on about constantly and define people. And then you match each strata of the organization against the general population. And if the demographics don't match exactly, so if there aren't, say, 51% women and 2% gay people and maybe 6% native people and whatever makes up the population, then you define the organization as inequitable and regarded as corrupt and in need of modification. There's obvious problems with that, not least that being that quality of outcome is perhaps the most pernicious of Marxist doctrines, and the attempt to impose that on entire populations in the Soviet Union and in Mao's China resulted in the deaths of millions of people. We fought the Cold War to stop claims that equality of outcome was the optimal metric by which to measure society's progress. So that's the University of Toronto HR department. And equity. Not only are they taking advice from a group of radicals who won't disavow violence in their pursuit of social change, but now they're basically pushing what can only be called communist propaganda from like the 1930s on their employees. It's absolutely appalling. Kelly Hannah Moffat, who's the vice president of Human Resources and Equity, should promptly resign. So, a little bit about the historical basis of these ideas. I would say that the political correct authoritarian types are fundamentally influenced by two philosophers. One, Karl Marx, who was the father of communism, and his basic principle was from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Now that sounds good, and it was a good enough slogan to attract the attention of intellectuals everywhere and other people as well. The problem comes in its practical application, and the problem is who determines what constitutes need. Because it's very, very difficult to decide if my need, say because I have a father with Alzheimer's, is greater than your need because you have a daughter with cancer and a wife who's an alcoholic. So who the hell parses up need? And the problem, of course, also is that need is infinite. And it's also no easy matter to determine whether or not each person is contributing according to his or her ability. That's partly why we have a free market, because these sorts of things cannot be determined by central authorities. And as soon as they are, then all hell breaks loose. And the other part of the PC philosophy horror show is Jacques Derrida. And Jacques Derrida, I think, was the most dangerous person who lived in the 20th century. Well, maybe not, because he had to compete with Hitler and Mao and Stalin. So maybe that's a bit of an overstatement. It probably is. Derrida, I think you might describe him as a philosopher of extreme resentment, and he's a real trickster. He basically claimed that human categorization is for exclusion. And so the postmodernist, he's a postmodernist, basically claimed that there's no truth, there's only competing power games, essentially. And that the reason that you categorize, the reason that human beings categorize is to further their power games. And so categorization is for exclusion. You don't form a club so much to keep people in as to keep people out, and that's part of your power game. And that's, of course, absolutely ridiculous, because one of the things that happens when you categorize is for is that you exclude things. Otherwise, every category contains everything that exists. And so what the hell good is a category like that? Obviously, categories exclude. The idea that that's why we categorize is preposterous. We categorize to simplify the world so that we can operate on it properly. And so we generalize across discrete entities so that we don't have to deal with every single discrete entity. And the reasons that we categorize are quite complex. We tend to categorize things in the same category if they can be used for the same purpose, because we're basically tool-using creatures. We don't so much categorize because things have the same objective properties, because things have many objective properties, but we do tend to categorize things as similar if they can be used for similar purposes. That's an extension of our tool-using capacity into the cognitive domain. And Derrida also claimed essentially that there's nothing outside the text, and so for the postmodernists, everything fundamentally is interpretation. Everything is subjective. And you can see that reflected, say, in legislation like Bill C-16, which insists that gender identity, and identity in general, I would say, is only subjectively defined, which is, of course, also absurd because your identity is something that you negotiate with other people. If you're older than 2, and I mean that technically because 2-year-olds are egocentric and they have a hard time negotiating anything with other children. They can't really learn to do that until they're about 3, and most kids are pretty good at it by the age of 4, but if they don't get it by the age of 4, then it's very difficult for them to make friends for the rest of their life. They get excluded from the peer groups, and then they don't stay abreast of their peers, and they end up alienated and often antisocial. It's really not good. To construe identity as only subjective is unbelievably psychologically and philosophically primitive. And the other thing about identity that should be noted is that identity also has functional utility. So if you have a genuine identity, so if you're an artist, say, or a lawyer, or a businessman, or a plumber, or a nurse, or a physician, your identity is something that it's a set of skills that you use to operate in the social and the natural world. And so there's plenty outside the text. Anyways, I was thinking today about who Karl Marx and Jacques Derrida would produce as a child, as an offspring, if they ever were able to mate successfully. And this is what I came up with. Yeah, it'd be the Joker. And here's why. Here's a great scene from the Batman movie that featured Heath Ledger, who really had the horror of resentment down to a science.
No so crazy as you look.
I told you, I'm a man of my word. Where's the Italian?
All tactical units will converge on the location in 20 minutes. I want auxiliary units to cover all possible getaway routes.
Wait. Joker man, what do you do with all your money?
You see, I'm a guy of simple taste. I enjoy dynamite, and gunpowder, and gasoline.
What's it?
And you know the thing that they have in common? They're cheap.
Said you were a man of few words.
Oh, I am. I'm only burning my half. All you care about is money. This town deserves a better class of criminal. And I'm gonna give it to them. Tell your men they work for me now. This is my city.
So you can see that when the Joker does get his share of the money, he doesn't want to use it for anything. It's not the point. The point is to gather it so that it can be destroyed, just to show that all he is a destroyer. And there are plenty of people who are only destroyers, and I certainly regard the malevolent end of the PC authoritarians as fundamental destroyers. They want to bring down everything because they're resentful. They're resentful right to the core. And that's a very powerful human motivation. You see that reflected, for example, in the biblical story of Cain and Abel, which is really the story of the first 2 human beings, because Adam and Eve were made by God, so the story goes. Cain and Abel were the first genuine human beings, and they instantly locked themselves into a murderous embrace where one was very resentful of the other's success and ended up, in fact, killing him despite the fact that he was his ideal. That's a cautionary tale for everyone. So I want to tell you a little bit about our research. So we took 192 political items that we gathered by analyzing what had been discussed in the media as elements or instances of political correctness. We tried to be agnostic about it and gather as many statements as we possibly could. And then we subjected them to a statistical procedure called a factor analysis, which helps sort beliefs into their categories. And two beliefs go in the same category. If you agree with one, you're likely to agree with the other, or if you disagree with one, you're likely to disagree with another. You can see patterns of covariance, it's called, but patterns of similarity within data sets, and it's an agnostic process because it's purely computational. I would say it's about as a-theoretical approach as can possibly be managed in a science. We found that there were two clumps of politically correct belief. We called one PC liberalism, and here's a couple of examples of things that PC liberals particularly believe. The question would be, rate the degree to which you think the following constitute evidence of an unjust system. If you're a PC liberal, you believe that society is unjust because only 5% of the Fortune 500 companies have women as CEOs, because in 2013 the poverty rate for blacks in the US was 27%, while for whites it was 10%, and because 64% of physicians and surgeons are men in the United States. So that means that society is unjust. PC liberals agree with such things as the world is warming because the human species burns too much fossil fuel, believe that racial, ethnic, and gender quotas should exist in employment, believe that government interventions should exist in schools and companies to ensure equality in professions where there's a historically large inequality. So that's partly quality of outcome. That's the beliefs that clump together to make the set of beliefs that we described as PC liberalism. And so here's what the PC authoritarians look like. They are in favor of censorship. So they believe that books, including the dictionary, movies, and art should be censored for offensive / racist / sexist, discriminatory language and ideas. So they're pro-censorship. They believe in punishment for racist, sexist, or homophobic slurs, and they also believe in retooling the justice system. So, for example, they believe that an alleged perpetrator of sexual assault should have to prove his or her innocence, reversing the standard Western legal doctrine of innocence before proven guilt. They believe that students suspected of sexual assault should be suspended pending further investigation, so that means that a suspicion is sufficient to disrupt someone's life. And they believe that it is wrong to criticize the status and rights of women under Islam because that is racist and disrespectful of multiculturalism. So that's the PC authoritarian set of beliefs. Here's what predicts whether or not you believe those things. So if you're going to believe the set of beliefs that characterizes PC liberalism, then the best predictors were that you had attended a politically correct seminar, so that shows you exactly how powerful propaganda is, and the answer is very. You're verbally intelligent, so the more verbally intelligent you are, the more you believe the PC liberal line. You're higher in openness, and that's a big 5 trait that's associated with creativity. You're agreeable, particularly compassionate, so agreeableness is another big 5 trait that's associated, I would say, with maternal behavior, especially on the compassionate end. You're more likely to be female, you're more likely to be educated, and you're more likely to be gay. Whereas if you're a PC authoritarian, you have low verbal intelligence and low intelligence in general, high disgust sensitivity, and that's been associated with conservatism in the past. So the PC authoritarians are a weird hybrid between agreeableness, say, which puts them on the PC spectrum, and the same kind of orderliness and disgust sensitivity that seem to characterize right-wing authoritarians. You're more likely to be non-white, religious, with a low income, female, diagnosed with an anxiety or mood disorder, so that might account for the desire for safe spaces and such things. Agreeable, compassionate, and polite. And again, the best way to think about agreeableness is as a maternal dimension. And that's, I think, why PC people treat everyone as if they're children. And you're conscientious, but orderly, not industrious. These factors are only correlated at 0.12, so these are not the same people. And we think the PC liberals are basically apologists for the PC authoritarians. So I want to read you a letter that I received recently that details that. I just wanted to say thanks for standing up for your beliefs, for others, and for free speech in the face of what I know must be a very continuous and publicly attempted shaming. I'm a liberal and a feminist in my late 30s. Until a few weeks ago, when I began checking out your videos, I would have described myself as a third-wave feminist. I graduated from the University of British Columbia with a major in biology and a minor in women's studies. I believe I was part of the early wave of this PC authoritarian indoctrination. The difference being, I remember being encouraged to have open dialogue back then in my women's studies classes. We didn't have trigger warnings or safe spaces. That came later. I ended up finding myself working in entertainment, which I now believe is influenced heavily by academia. For the past 15 years or so, I've managed the careers of comedians, and have always been drawn to comedians with a message, having adored folks like Bill Hicks, Richard Pryor, and George Carlin. Over time, comedians with a message eventually came to mean comics who are living in this social justice warrior bubble, as am I. For almost 20 years, I lived in this echo chamber and watched as social justice academic concepts grew to mainstream influence, which I applauded. But at some point, I started realizing these concepts of equality and inclusion, at least in my online world, have morphed into this strange cult of belief that discourages dissent, discussion, or free speech and thought. As I mentioned, most of this came after I graduated, so I saw it unfold online. I think social media, for all of the good it has brought us, has allowed us to become more isolated than ever before possible. My entire Facebook and Twitter feeds are full of SJWs. This is the echo chamber I self-selected, and most of them are in an all-out assault on differing opinions and on each other right now. Perhaps because of the result of the US election. There are a few of us within my echo chamber who are trying to share thoughtful articles that attempt to answer the question, how did Trump get elected? No matter the nuanced and intelligent content of these articles, or the pains to which I am seeing folks try and present them in a non-offensive way to anyone who may not agree, the SJWs are cannibalizing these folks. To be clear, these are also liberals who have been considered a part of the same community until now, who are being thrown out, unfriended, and ganged up on in this social media public shaming way. Now you see, that's a good indication of why I'm reading this letter. It's because our research indicates that there are two clumps of belief in the PC camp, the liberal type beliefs, but they're strongly influenced by trait agreeableness, which is not the case with let's say, normal liberalism, and the PC authoritarians. And they're strange bedfellows, let's put it that way, and they don't really agree. And given the opportunity, the PC authoritarians will eat the PC liberals. So this is a warning to you PC liberal types. You should stop apologizing and acting as intelligent and articulate mouthpieces for the PC authoritarians. They are not your friends, and they're pro-censorship. And this throwing people out, cannibalizing, as it's mentioned in this letter, is precisely the attempt to impose censorship on their so-called allies. Well, they aren't your allies, and that's exactly what you're seeing. These are allies doing their best to try to understand why Trump won, so we can best change course and sway people to our liberal point of view. And they are being told that they need to check their privilege, that they are only posting these things because of their unconscious racism. Yeah, that's the sort of thing that the University of Toronto is trying to train their staff out of. That they are part of the white supremacist culture and that they are not allies, etc. It saddens me because I now believe it's this kind of censorship and divisiveness and willingness to write people off by putting them in a bigot box that caused the Trump backlash to begin with. I think these folks are unconsciously, actually, I'm not so sure it's unconscious, but it might be, pushing more and more people out of the left and ensuring that Trump will win again in 2020. Ultimately, I think they are ensuring that our country will only become more polarized into this us versus them mentality. Yeah, you see, the reason I don't think that's so much unconscious, as the women's studies websites all say, if you go read them, they're out to destroy the patriarchy, which is basically indistinguishable from Western civilization. So it's not so clear to me that it's unconscious. I think they are propelling the very alt-right that they seek to oppose. For many of these people in my timeline, this is their career. They are all churning out online article after article right now about how racism is to blame for the election, and if you think anything else, you're a racist. About how white people need to wear a safety pin to show they are allies. About how white people need to take the safety pins off now because it's embarrassing and only shows that they want validation for being good white people. Piece upon piece about something so trivial as a safety pin. And I see countless privileged SJWs in my timeline wringing their hands and posting long status updates asking how to be the best ally they can to more marginalized folks and how these contradictory articles are confusing them. Well, of course they are. If you're only waiting to be told how to be a good human being because you've bought into the idea that your privilege prevents you from your right to your own opinions and choices, then you will be pulled by each and every contradictory and incendiary opinion piece like this. I'm sorry for the long-winded email. This started off as a simple thank you. I started watching your videos a little before the election because I saw folks in my timeline labeling you a transphobe, and I looked a little deeper, only to be surprised that I disagreed with them. From there, I started listening to some of your lectures while at the gym. I particularly enjoyed the tragedy versus evil talk, and the Cain and Abel allegory has stayed with me for weeks now in almost every choice I make, as it should. I am learning to live while being vulnerable, to unravel what I actually believe about things, independent of this SJW ideology I have been subscribing to for so long. I now see that it's not so different than the conservative fundamentalist ideology I was raised in and took several years to shed in my teens. I don't think I understood the full meaning of that Nietzsche quote. He who fights with monsters should be careful, lest he thereby become a monster. And if thou gaze long into an abyss, the abyss will also gaze into thee. Until I began listening to your lectures and reflecting on the actions I've seen in my community/echo chamber recently. So thank you for that too. Finally, I am sure you have many people assisting you, and I'm going to contribute to your Patreon. But if you ever need additional help, especially on any of the SJW magic words and conversation-stopping tactics, let me know. I have lived with that ideology as my religion for so many years, and I know the language well. Well, that's an excellent letter, and so thank you very much to the writer of that letter, who I've taken some pains to disguise. Here's something that Milton Friedman said about inequality. Milton Friedman was someone The Economist magazine called the most influential economist of the second half of the 20th century. He's often put into the conservative camp of economists. A society that puts equality before freedom will get neither. A society that puts freedom before equality will get a high degree of both. Well, something to think about. Now, I should also say that the anti-PC stickers are still for sale. I'll put the link back below. The app's in development, and that was the app that will help us locate where the bulk of poster activity is that's associated with politically correct activity. And we have a web page in development. The idea for the web page is to allow people to upload policy documents from companies and other institutions, as well as governments, that are fundamentally politically correct in their origin, and to track their developmental course so that we can start to figure out who's behind these sorts of things and what might be done to stop them. So anyways, that's all for now. I hope that you are able to tune into the debate. Just a reminder, that's Saturday, November 9th at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and it'll be live cast on Jordan Peterson Videos. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.
Peterson posted the November 19th, 2016 University of Toronto debate to his channel. Though he has since deleted the video, it is still available on other channels. Why did Peterson delete these videos?